to talk about one of the most interesting subjects in the world, I would say. And unfortunately, that's probably what I will do today. I will probably raise more questions than give answers. And the reason for that is that I don't think that there really are any good answers to this question. And Regina talked about it a little bit in her introduction here. It is a polarization between the conventional farming and the organic agriculture, and perhaps especially in animal welfare questions. And it really depends on who you're talking to, and who you're asking that question. So I think I will just start by giving you a reply, the politician reply. Well, it all depends, and all is relative. That's my answer to the question, how are the animals in organic agriculture? And why is that? Depending on who you're asking, animal welfare are completely different things. Some would say that if an animal produces good, well, then it's a good animal welfare. Others would say that if the animals aren't running around doing whatever they want in the woods, it's not good animal welfare. And that's probably the most difficult thing about this question, to really give a good definition to animal welfare. And I will come back to that later. Later on, I will present some results from different studies and different regulations and how that affects animal welfare, both in positive and in negative ways. But first, we need to talk a little bit more about the "it depends" concept. Of course, it depends on which species we're talking about. I will give examples from cattle, laying hens, broilers, pigs today, and all of those species have very different needs when it comes to behavior, feed, physiology, and so on. A regulation that might be very positive for one of those species may be less positive for another one. And in the cases where general regulation really poses a problem for animal welfare, that problem might be very severe in one species and not that severe in another one. Moreover, it depends on what country we're talking about. I will focus on Norway today, but there are not much research performed in Norway under Norwegian conditions regarding animal welfare in organic agriculture. And this will be my first more research is needed comment. And why is country then so important? First of all, the organic regulations will be different in different countries. If you compare Norway to Germany, to Sweden, to Brazil, there will be different regulation, even if the ones on the top here, Norwegian, German, and Swedish one, they're based on the same EU regulations actually, but they are still different. Also, not only are the organic regulations different, we also have differences in, if we look at the national welfare regulations, of course. And that means that the difference between conventional and organic farming will be very different if we look in different countries. For example, in Sweden and Norway have some of the most strict welfare regulations in the world today. And that means that if we don't have very strict organic regulations, the difference between those different production systems won't be that big actually. Of course, it depends on the farm. Within all those countries, we have all kinds of farmers within both conventional and organic farming. Each farmer has different opportunities and makes different choices. It is important to remember that the welfare regulations, they are thought to be minimal requirements. They allow really full flexibility as long as you just keep the button. There are other individuals involved in this topic as well. The individuals that we tend to forget, that is the animals, of course. They are also individuals. And we tend to look at animal welfare at herd levels, more or less only. And I understand that it's not easy to assess welfare for all of the broilers in a barn with thousands and thousands of individuals. However, the individual differences, that's why I love welfare science. That's the interesting part of it. The individual is formed by its genetics, its DNA, by its gender, and its early experiences. And the genetics will interact with the environment into what we call G by E, genotype environment interactions, so that one genotype or one animal will actually thrive better in one environment compared to another genotype. And all of this, it interacts together to form the personality of the animals. And if that wasn't enough, all those animals are housed together in a social environment. And they also, of course, the social environment is of course also important for the personality and also for the genotype environment interactions. As I mentioned before, different persons will most certainly define welfare in different ways. And something that can be good to have in mind when trying to score welfare are the 5 freedoms. And that is a rather well-known concept, I think, both for researchers in animal welfare and for authorities. And that is, the 5 freedoms are thought to be the really base to achieve the minimum acceptable welfare the individual should have. And they should have freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, the freedom to express normal behavior, that's my favorite, and freedom from fear and distress. And that actually means when looking at animal welfare in conventional or in organic farming, we need to see to the feed we give the animals. It should be proper. The housing should be enough so that the animals are comfortable in it. We need to look at preventive measures, and we need to look at medicines and treatments to prevent them from being in pain or being diseased. We also must give them an environment that allows them to express normal behavior. And what is normal behavior? That's a good question, and I could talk, I think, for 1 hour for that. But and they shouldn't be afraid and shouldn't be stressed. And isn't stress and fear normal behaviors? Or, well, it is actually quite a broad subject. Anyhow, sorry, I need to see what I was supposed to say. However, this gives an indication on how many factors we need to look at. And I think some of you were into it before, but there are different kinds of studies that can be performed. And one kind are studies that are looking into small details in the regulation. For example, feed or specific stocking densities for the specific animals. And they are extremely important to understand where we should be in the organic agriculture. Absolutely. The problem with this approach is that these small differences in the regulation, of course, and details, they of course integrate to each other as well. If you give straw to a pig in a pen, a concrete pen, that will be very beneficial for that pig. If you look at a pig outside that are able to root and explore its surroundings, then perhaps that bunch of straw isn't that important actually. There are also other studies in which the researchers are trying more or less to combine all those factors into welfare indexes. These are quite new studies, not performed very much in organic farming, but I will give a few examples and ways for those. And those are of course also extremely important to look upon. This was mentioned by Regina before, the 4 principles. Animal welfare is mainly mentioned in the principle of fairness, and says that animals should be provided with the conditions and opportunities of life that accord with their physiology, natural behavior, and well-being. Fair enough, I would say. Do we live up to it today? What is natural behavior? And how do iPhone see upon well-being, for example? What is the definitions? I think it's rather ambitious, actually. Especially if we look at most commercial, not conventional, but commercial animal agriculture today. Oops. Oh, sorry. The regulations for organic agriculture in Norway, we're talking Norway now, it's kind of a large document actually, so we don't have time to go through all of it. I'm trying to keep my timing here. But we have, I will focus on the natural behavior, I would say, because that is so extremely important, both for the consumers and for the organic agriculture community. And also I'm an ethologist. I like natural behavior, it's interesting. So we have to focus on a few examples that I think highlight some of the factors that I've talked about already. And these are 5 conditions that are important for organic agriculture per se. And they are also really important for the consumers. We have space allowance, if the animals are loose housed or not, if they are allowed to be outdoor or not, and then we have if they get enough roughage, and how we take care of their life. There are 5 quite good examples on how we look upon animal welfare in organic agriculture. We start with space allowance. That is something that consumers have said is one of the most important parts of animal welfare, actually. And they are really concerned about how we keep animals today with space allowances. If we look at the Norwegian organic regulation compared to the national welfare regulations, that gives them actually more space. We should remember that as well. For layers, well, it depends on what production systems we look upon, of course. I think the most rational is to compare loose house conventional with the organic. And in the conventional, it's allowed with, I think it is 9 hens per square meter, and in the organic, it's 6 hens per square meter, so that's quite a large difference. In broilers, that's perhaps the largest difference, I would say. In broilers, that's also quite interesting. We don't measure the individuals, we measure in kilos. So we have an allowance of 36 kilos per square meters in the conventional. That's about 18 to 20 dollars per square meter. In organic agriculture, the same number are 20. And I think that is quite a good example to looking at. And that the animals in organic production usually have some more space than animals in conventional production is to improve animal welfare. And in general, a lower stocking density is positive for welfare. However, there are, of course, thresholds for this as well. If we give them half a square meter more, is that positive for welfare or not? Are we strict enough in organic agriculture? Stefan Boyce et al. Looked at this for broilers. Not in organic agriculture, it was just a small experiment, but she really thoroughly looked at different stocking densities for broilers and how that affects welfare parameters, both behavioral and also the health ones. And she found that high stocking density is associated with decreased walking ability, decreased locomotion, and decreased foraging behavior. They get more disturbed resting and preening. And this resting behavior is extremely important for young animals. Young animals need to sleep they feel well. I haven't slept that much tonight, so I'm a bit tired, and it's really important for the welfare. They have an increased sitting behavior. They're a bit more passive. And actually, broilers, she could show that broilers really work for lower stocking density. And they work for it almost as much as they work for food when they're feed deprived, actually. That's kind of interesting. She could also see a tendency for increased fear in those high stocking densities. Health-wise, they have a worsened leg health, increased foot pad dermatitis, and increased hop dermatitis. Where the thresholds were for all these factors were a bit fluctuating. For the behavioral, it was more or less a gradual scale, so the less the better, more or less. What they also did was to combine all those different factors into this integrated welfare score that I talked about before. And the higher score, the better. And this is quite interesting because they came to the conclusion that there were 3 different classes of these welfare scores. The lower stocking densities got the highest scores, that's good. And they had between 6 and 15 kilos per square meter. The middle ones had a mid score, somewhere in between, that's between 23 and 47 kilos per square meter, and then we have the highest one, 56 kilos, that's really crowded, it's quite extreme actually. And where are we in Norwegian agriculture? Well, we're not here, but we're somewhere here for the organic regulations, in between the low and the middle one, I would say. And we're here for the conventional ones. So, what does that mean? More research is needed. Yes, it is actually, under Norwegian conditions, and of course we would then need to really look at the stocking densities that we allow here, I would say. But it really seems like it is important for the animals with this lower stocking density. Loose housing is another factor that concerns the consumers and is very central in organic agriculture. There aren't that many differences here between the organic and the conventional regulations, but if we look at Norwegian dairy cows, they can still be held better, both in the conventional and the organic regulations. However, it will be changed in 2024. Let's hope that it will be changed this time. All pigs in Norway needs to be held loose house. That's not a difference. That's good, I would say. The big difference is, of course, the layers. 39%, I think, of all layers in Norway are housed in cages. And that's really the difference regarding loose housing. And if we look at cages compared to loose housing systems in layers, that's really debated quite a lot. Loose housing systems, they increase the possibility to fulfill the behavioral needs. At the same time, it can increase to behaviors that we really don't want to have, feather pecking and cannibalism. These are abnormal behaviors. They are performed by quite a lot of all our animals in the EU today. And it's thought to have its base in the chickens want to explore their environment all the time. And they really don't have much to explore, so they just peck each other instead. They explore each other, so they just peck the feathers from each other. And the cannibalism is not that they, instead of just pecking the feathers, they start pecking the skin, and it's kind of nasty, actually. And it is said that it is more feather pecking and cannibalism in the organic system. I haven't seen any studies performed in Norway, not at all. What we know is that yes, there is more feather pecking in loose housing systems. And why is that? Well, in a cage you have 8, 10, 12 different victims. In the loose housing system you have thousands. So what the cage do is actually to mask the problem. Moreover, if we look at the different regulations, here comes the country is so very important again. if we look in the EU, what you do to prevent this is that you cut the beaks of the hens when they're young. That's a way to preventing that they pluck each other. Beak trimming is allowed in conventional agriculture in the EU, but it's not allowed in the organic ones. In Norway, beak trimming is prohibited in both systems. That means that, well, yes, probably may be so that there are more feather pecking and cannibalism in organic systems in the rest of Europe, but in Norway we don't know, because we are really quite good at finding other solutions than cutting the beaks of the hens. There's also been actually one of these welfare index studies on organic or different systems. And organic production systems had a better welfare index compared to both cages and other free-range systems. That was quite clear, actually. And of course, we could say that we should go back to the cages, because it's probably will lead to less mortality, or we know that it does. But as I said, it's more or less masking the same problem. It's another way of cutting the beaks of the hens, I would say. So no, we shouldn't go back to cages. Being able to go out and being able to graze, that's probably one of the most important parts of the organic regulation, and the consumers perceive this as very, very important for welfare. And there are differences for more or less all of those species. Norwegian dairy cows, they need to go out for at least 8 weeks. The majority have been outside for 12 weeks in conventional farming. The organic regulation states that all herbivores should be allowed grazing whenever possible. That's good. Pigs should have access to outdoor yard anyways. Could be concrete floor, but anyway, it's outdoors. Layers and broilers, that's probably the species that are the differences are the largest, I would say. They need to have quite large outdoor areas. I think it's 4 square meters per hen or per broiler. That's a lot, whenever the weather allows it. And allowing animals to be outdoor as much as possible is, as I said, a very important attribute. The environment allowed animals to make choices between temperatures, light, stocking densities, and making choices, that's extremely important for each biological creature to have control over its situation. That's very much known. Especially, this is important for animals such as pigs and chickens. They spend 80–90% of the time exploring the surroundings if they can. We also know that it has effects on both health, behavioral freedom, and abnormal behavior. We were talking about feather pecking, for example, in chickens, and it is known that increased use of the outdoor run, it really decreases abnormal behavior in chickens. So it's not only to have the outdoor run, the hens really must use it to benefit from it as well. Cows that are grazing have a better welfare index than when they are indoors during winter time. However, what happens when we bring the animals out from the secure barn environment? It has been mentioned before by Regina. There are more parasites. They are more prone to get different infections, and yes, they can be eaten by some predators as well. It's really, absolutely. However, there are probably ways to get around this. And it's also a question of what is most important. And that's why I think it is so polarized. If you ask a veterinarian, the answer may be quite different from if you ask me as an ethologist, I would say. So it's a good example on how these different regulations that really are thought to increase the natural behavior and to really cover the different natural needs perhaps can be not detrimental, but a bit negative for other welfare aspects. I think we just skip this one, actually. The young is more interesting. Dairy calves in conventional production, they are usually separated from the mother more or less directly after birth. After that, they can be kept in single boxes alone for 8